Did you see ships of force in the Channel, mynheer? English, French, Dutch? There was... And here the man's English gave way. He made a helpless, encompassing gesture. Fog? Fog, he repeated. Did you hear guns? A few, but very likely they were only signals. Coded data speeding through the fog. So opaque to light, but so transparent to sound. And here he lost control of his intellectual sphincters and began to think out loud in French, fortified with Latin, working out a system for sending encrypted data from place to place using explosions, building on ideas from Wilkins' Cryptonomicon, but marrying them to a practical plan that, in its lavish expenditure of gunpowder, would be sure to please John Comstock. In other words, he identified himself, to Daniel anyway, as Dr. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. "Show it to me, Dr. Leibniz," Wilkins said, skipping over all of the formalities. He had not urinated in 3 days, and so there was a certain urgency about everything. Leibniz sat gingerly on the edge of the bed and opened the box. Daniel saw gears, cranks, shafts. He thought it might be a new sort of timepiece, but it had no dial and no hands, only a few wheels with numbers stamped on them. "It owes much to Monsieur Pascal's machine, of course," Leibniz said. "But this one can multiply numbers as well as add and subtract them." "Make it work for me, Doctor." "I must confess to you that it is not finished yet." Leibniz frowned, tilted the box toward the light, and blew into it sharply. A cockroach flew out and traced a flailing parabola to the floor and scurried under the bed. "This is just a demo, but when it is finished, it will be magnifique." "Never mind," Wilkins said. "It uses denary numbers?" "Yes, like Pascal's, but binary would work better." "You needn't tell me," Wilkins said, and then rambled for at least a quarter of an hour, quoting whole pages from relevant sections of the Cryptonomicon. Leibniz finally cleared his throat and said, "There are mechanical reasons, too, with denary numbers. Too many meshings of gears are necessary. Friction and backlash play havoc." Hook could build it," Wilkins said, "but enough of machines. Let us speak of panpsychism. Tell me now, have you met with success in Vienna?" "I have written to the Emperor several times, describing the French king's Bibliothèque du Roi." "Trying to incite his envy." "Yes, but in his hierarchy of vices, sloth would appear to reign unchallenged by envy or anything else. Have you met with success here, my lord?" "Sir Elias Ashmole is starting a brave library, but he's distracted and addled with alchemy. I've had to attend to more fundamental matters," Wilkins said, and gestured weakly toward the door through which Bulstrode had departed. "I believe that binary arithmetical engines will be of enormous significance. Oldenburg, too, is most eager. If I could carry your work forward, sir, I would consider myself privileged." "Now we are only being polite. I have no time. Waterhouse." Leibniz closed up his box. The Bishop of Chester watched the lid closing over the engine, and his eyelids almost closed at the same moment. But then he summoned up a bit more strength. Leibniz backed out of the way, and Daniel took his place. "My lord?" It was all he could get out. Drake had been his father, but John Wilkins really was his lord in almost every sense of the word. His lord, his bishop, his minister, his professor. "The responsibility now falls upon you to make it all happen." "My lord? To make what happen?" But Wilkins was either dead or asleep. Daniel got them turned back in the direction of the river. He was trying to make out what responsibility specifically had just been placed on his shoulders by Wilkins. He realized, after a quarter of an hour of being a very poor conversationalist, that Leibniz might have ideas on the subject. "You said you wanted to carry Wilkins' work forward, Doctor. Which of his projects were you referring to? Flying to the moon or the philosophical language? Leibniz said, as if this should have been obvious. He knew that Daniel had been involved in that project and seemed to take the question as a sign that Daniel wasn't especially proud of it, which was true. Noting Leibniz's respect for the project, Daniel felt a stab of misgivings that perhaps the philosophical language had some wonderful properties that he'd been too stupid to notice. "Oh, what more is there to be done with it?" Daniel asked. "You have some refinements? Additions? You wish to translate the work into German?" "You're shaking your head, Doctor. What is it, then?" "I was trained as a lawyer. Don't look so horrified, Mr. Waterhouse. It is respectable enough for an educated man in Germany. You must remember that we don't have a royal society. After I was awarded my Doctor of Jurisprudence, I went to work for the Archbishop of Mainz, who gave me the job of reforming the legal code, which was a Tower of Babel. Roman and Germanic and local common law all mingled together. I concluded that there was little point in jury-rigging something. What was needed was to break everything down into certain basic concepts and begin from first principles. I can see how the philosophical language would be useful in breaking things down, Daniel said. But to build them back up, you would need something else. Logic, Leibniz said. Logic has a dismal reputation among the higher primates in the Royal Society, because they associate it with the scholastic pedants who tormented them in university, Leibniz said agreeably. I'm not talking about that sort of thing. When I say logic, I mean Euclidean. Begin with certain axioms and combine them according to definite rules. Yes, and build up a system of laws that is as provable and as internally consistent as the theory of conic sections. But you have recently moved to Paris, have you not? Leibniz nodded. Part of the same project. For obvious reasons, I need to improve my knowledge of mathematics. What better place for it? It's not a secret that my patron is the Archbishop of Mainz, Leibniz protested. But you said you were a Lutheran. And I am. But one of the Archbishop's objectives is to reconcile the two churches. Here we say there are more than two, Daniel reminded him.
Once the characteristic numbers of most notions are determined, the human race will have a new kind of tool. A tool that will increase the power of the mind much more than optical lenses helped our eyes. A tool that will be as far superior to microscopes or telescopes as reason is to vision. Leibniz, Philosophical Essays.
Massachusetts Bay Colony, October the 12th, 1713. Sometimes it seems as if everyone's immigrating to America. Sailing ships on the North Atlantic as thick as watermen's boats on the Thames, more or less wearing ruts in the sea lanes. And so, in an idle way, Enoch supposes that his appearance on the threshold of the Massachusetts Bay Colony Institute of Technological Arts will come as no surprise at all to its founder. But Daniel Waterhouse nearly swallows his teeth when Enoch walks through the door. And it's not just because the hem of Enoch's cloak knocks over a great teetering stack of cards. Enoch takes advantage of the lull to make other observations and try to judge empirically whether Daniel's as unsound as the faculty of Harvard College would have him believe. From the doctor's jibes on the ferry ride, Enoch had expected nothing but cranks and gears. And indeed, Waterhouse does have a mechanic shop in the corner of the... How will Enoch characterize this structure to the Royal Society? A log cabin, while technically correct, calls to mind wild men in skins. Sturdy, serviceable, and in no way extravagant laboratory making ingenious use of indigenous building materials. There. But anyway, most of it is given over not to the hardware of gears, but to softer matters. Cards. They are stacked in slender columns that would totter in the breeze from a moth's wings if the columns had not been jammed together into banks, stairways, and terraces, the whole formation built on a layer of loose tiles on the dirt floor to, Enoch guesses, prevent the card stacks from wicking up the copious groundwater. Edging farther into the room and peering round a bulwark of card stacks, Enoch finds a writing desk stocked with blank cards. Ragged grey quills project from inkpots, bent and broken ones cross-hatch the floor. Bits of down and fluff and cartilage and other bird wreckage form a dandruffy layer on everything. On pretext of cleaning up his mess, Enoch begins to pick the spilled cards off the floor. Each is marked to the top with a rather large number, always odd, and beneath it a long row of ones and zeros, which, since the last digit is always 1, indicating an odd number, he takes to be nothing other than the self-same number expressed in the binary notation lately perfected by Leibniz. Underneath the number, then, is a word or short phrase, a different one on each card. As he picks them up and restacks them, he sees a Noah's Ark, treaties terminating wars, membranophones, e.g. Merletons, the notion of a classless society, the pharynx and its outgrowths, drawing instruments, e.g. T-squares, the skepticism of Pyrrhon of Elise, requirements for valid maritime insurance contracts, the Kamakura Bakufu, the fallacy of assertion without knowledge, agates, rules governing the determination of questions of fact in Roman civil courts, mummification, sunspots, the sex organs of bryophytes, e.g. liverwort, Euclidean geometry, homotheties and solimitudes, pantomime, the election and reign of Rudolf of Habsburg, testes, non-symmetrical dyadic relations, the investiture controversy, phosphorus, traditional impotence remedies, the Armenian heresy, and some of these strike one as being too complicated for monads, he says, desperate for some way to break the ice, such as this, the development of Portuguese hegemony over Central Africa. Look at the number at the top of that card, Waterhouse says. It is the product of 5 primes, 1 for development, 1 for Portuguese, 1 for hegemony, 1 for Central, and 1 for Africa. Ah, so it's not a monad at all, but a composite. Yes. It's difficult to tell when the cards are helter-skelter. Don't you think you should organize them? According to what scheme? Waterhouse asks shrewdly. Oh no, I'll not be tricked into that discussion. No linear indexing system is adequate to express the multidimensionality of knowledge, Dr. Waterhouse reminds him. But if each one is assigned a unique number, prime numbers for monads and products of primes for composites, then organizing them is simply a matter of performing computations. Mr. Root, what does she want of me? The same thing as ever. Dr. Waterhouse shrinks. The inner 30-year-old recedes, and he becomes just an oddly familiar-looking gaffer. Should have known. What other use is there for a broken-down old computational mondologist? It's remarkable. What? I've known you for, 30 or 40 years now, almost as long as you've known Leibniz. I've seen you in some unenviable spots, but in all that time, I don't believe I've ever heard you whine until just then. Daniel considers this carefully, then actually laughs. My apologies. Not at all. I thought my work would be appreciated here. I was going to establish what, to Harvard, would have been what Gresham's College was to Oxford. Imagined I'd find a student body, or at least a protégé. Someone who could help me build the logic mill. Hasn't worked out that way. All of the mechanically talented sorts are dreaming of steam engines. Ludicrous. What's wrong with water wheels? Plenty of rivers here. Look, there's a little one right between your feet. Engines are naturally more interesting to the young. You needn't tell me. When I was a student, a prism was a wonder. Rolling balls down inclined planes, sporting with electricity and magnets. Against that, what's in my shack here to interest them? Could this lack of interest have something to do with that everyone knows the project was conceived by Leibniz? I'm not doing it his way. His plan was to use balls running down troughs to represent the binary digits and pass them through mechanical gates to perform the logical operations. Ingenious, but not very practical. I'm using push rods. Superficial. I ask again, could your lack of popularity here be related to that all Englishmen believe that Leibniz is a villain, a plagiarist? This is an unnatural turn in the conversation, Mr. Root. Are you being devious?